Coach and Benway podcast. I'm Coach Redpill, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Benway, and we've been shooting the breeze here. We're talking about fireworks in Chicago because, Benway, why don't you explain it?
Oh, Coach seems to think every other firework that goes off in Chicago is actually a gunshot that knocks out another undesirable person in the society.
I know the kind of neighborhood you live in, man. I mean, come on, don't fool it. It's similar to the neighborhood that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez went to. Yeah.
Hey, just because we successfully cleansed our neighborhood doesn't mean you have to bring shit to my backyard.
Oh man. So anyway, we have like a list of topics that we're sort of semi-prepared. But what we were going to talk about first was you were talking about Amazon, that they sold their face recognition software. When you give me a little background of it, I don't know what the hell that is. I mean, I know what facial recognition technology is, but I don't know what the business is.
Oh no! So it's part of Amazon Web Services, which those of you who aren't in the know, AWS, Amazon Web Services, have that branded in your brain. That is Amazon's cloud platform and data storage services. So anytime someone has a website, needs to run data analysis, they need compute power and they need storage space, boom, you go to Amazon, they have all the server space in the world you need. And they'll do all that little shit for you. The dirty secret is they have access to a astronomical amount of data that you probably could never even conceive of. And whether you buy from Amazon or not, your data's there, just by virtue of how much penetration they have.
Well, where did they get this data, by the way? From other clients?
Anybody who signs up for Amazon Web Services stores their data on Amazon Web Services. That's the very nature of the process. They're selling compute and storage.
Yeah, but wouldn't it be illegal for them to know what is in the storage? I mean, like for instance, you go to a self-storage facility, right? And the self-storage facility doesn't know what's in each of the self-storage units. I mean, it sort of defeats the purpose. You're supposed to have privacy there. Is it basically you're telling me that Amazon has access to all the data it's platforming, it's storing?
So legally, they're not allowed to see what's in there. The joke behind that is a couplefold. One, the parameters they have, I guarantee you, this is speculation. Anybody can get around them if they so chose without much effort. The other thing is Amazon, just because you have limits on Amazon looking at the data inside your warehouse, there's an astronomical amount of metadata they can use and make decisions about. So metadata being, yes, I may have data in my little storage locker that you can't see, but how many times I go to that storage locker, the volume of things that I upload, types of things that I upload, traffic to that, who comes to that site, IP addresses, that's all fair game.
It seems monstrous and unfair. I mean, it just seems that they should just look away and not be collecting data and making money off of the aggregation of data. Well, okay, fuck it. It's capitalism, neoliberal capitalism, which I despise. So move on. What's the story?
So here's the little detail that's fun. So as part of its business development, there is a service called Recognition with a K, of course, because there's nothing that says a stupid tech idea like changing a letter unnecessarily in a name for branding purposes.
And making it a capital in the middle of the word? Is that?
No, it's not. Thank God it's not a capital, but let's give it some time. I'm sure they'll go there. But the premise of the software is this. We can use our facial recognition data software to identify millions of people across the globe, maybe even more. You know who we should sell it to? Government agencies. They could never do wrong with that.
Oh, no, of course not, because the government is your friend. Okay, so who are they selling recognition to?
Department of Homeland Security, ICE, FBI, any kind of group that you.
No. I mean, they're selling the whole business unit.
No, they're not selling the business unit. They're selling their services.
Oh, that's a happy thought. So yeah, and they can easily come to some deal with Facebook to access or Instagram or one of those and access all their pictures. And basically, it's panopticon. DSA, FBI, CIA, whomever, whichever three-letter alphabet soup agency can have instant access to all of your data, all of your pictures, everybody you ever hang out with, and probably even if you appear in the background of some random picture, right? So they'll know everything about you. Jesus Christ, this is this is part of the reason I left the United States. I haven't stepped foot in the United States since 2012, I think. I'm trying to remember. It's been a long time since I've been in the States. But anyway, so they're selling it to the. But they've been selling data to the big government agencies for a while, haven't they?
Yeah, of course, everybody is sort of playing into the pocket of that situation. That's not a big surprise. I think this is just raising the bar a little bit in terms of what they can deliver and what kind of capabilities you have. And here's that's the dirty secret of the whole business. They are, these so-called scions of a sort of tech-inspired, semi-libertarian left-wing companies. The whole notion of do no evil. They love working with governments. It's an easy contract. Well, not an easy contract to get, but it's a big contract to get. Once you got it, you're kind of in. People love working with those guys. The money is very big. They don't care about you. I
No.
guarantee it.
That's fairly obvious. Yeah. Wait. The government doesn't care about me, which I know, though I'm disappointed and hurt. Or does Amazon not care about me because they always keep sending me ads saying that they love me and that they want me back?
If you have to ask if someone cares about you, they don't. That's just just like the joke is if you can't figure out, who they're, how a company makes money, it's making money off of you.
Yeah. Well, it all comes from the famous line of poker. If you can't recognize the fool at the table, then you are the fool.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, it's just one more thing. It's just one more thing to be outraged about. It's just one more thing of abuse of the people. It's just one more step away from the ideal of democracy that I at least grew up with, and I'm sure you did too. But it's so damn depressing.
Well, here's the thing. Just not being in the United States, as far as I'm concerned, probably isn't going to help you. Now, there's a certain degree to which, ironically enough, the EU, in its data protection policies, I forget the name of the legislation, but it actually was a big deal to these companies. It was a few months ago when I think they passed it or they were getting ready to enforce it. And so you probably noticed a few months ago, all sorts of like, we've updated our privacy policies, That was because of the EU legislation that came out. So it's probably hits this kind of shit very directly. And the theory was because the EU laws were so draconian and their ability to punish these companies so overarching that effectively that EU law became global law because all companies kind of who had businesses in the EU had to just comply to the EU standards in order to get through this. My guess is ultimately at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, when the government wants what the government wants, they're going to just give anyway. So this notion that you're being protected is a joke.
Yeah, I know. The funny thing though is that like the government has access to all of this data all the time, right? But whenever like an actual crisis happens and they have to find out about one particular guy, it takes them fucking forever. Or sometimes they can't find out about the proper information. It's sort of like their reflex is to gather up everything, and yet their ability to act on that information is just so incredibly slow or so incredibly limited. And there's so many ways to get around it. Get around it in the sense of just blowing them off. There are political ways. You contribute to the right people. Like for instance, the other day, right, when we were talking with Ethan Ralph, right, and he was talking about some rich guy who had gone to jail with him, right? And the rich guy paid off the right politicians, and the right politicians leaned on the district attorney and the judge, and the guy got off with like a month's time for doing some fairly heinous things, right? Yeah, like that. What exactly is the point of all this? It seems that it's pointless.
Two things. One, just because the law can be distributed arbitrarily doesn't really undermine the whole notion of the system. If anything, it just makes it worse because you have the capability to do whatever you want, but the also the will to decide who you want to dispense with whenever you so choose and use these tactics accordingly. So that doesn't really faze me one way or bit in terms of thinking like, oh, what's the point of all this? The other bit you had mentioned, like, well, what if they're just generally incompetent, right? Like the school shooters in in Florida who like, oh, people have been saying like 30 different times this guy's a risk and nobody did anything about it. Well, that's just an underlying necessity for the investments in AI, which is also happening along these lines. AI along the lines of, well, we're going to have the system predict crime and figure out who and or not who, but where is crime more likely to happen, direct attention to that in a
Well, they're gonna
proactive kind of manner.
they're gonna do the who as well. I mean, come on, let's not kid ourselves.
They're not doing who now. I just didn't want to suggest that they were, but it's going to happen.
Oh, that's gonna happen very quickly. Well, you know that experiment that they did in China about facial recognition technology and criminal behavior, right?
No.
Oh, it was really fascinating. What happened was that the Chinese just, uploaded a whole batch of pictures, right? And their AI found a positive correlation between certain facial features and criminal behavior. It was something like it was like at least a couple of standard deviations above the mean. I mean, they were predicting who was going to be the criminal based on their faces, and the Chinese were thinking, if this works with criminals that we know are criminals, let's inflict this on people who aren't criminals yet, and we'll keep an eye on them. That was the rationale, and it was like, okay, on the one hand, you're thinking to yourself, that's, civil rights and all the rest of it. On the other hand, you're thinking, yeah, that's pretty practical, I mean, why devote your law enforcement resources to the grandma down the street who's never going to hurt a fly? Why not, use AI for something predictive? And so it does make sense. I think that, and the Chinese facial features have less deviation among them than the features of Western people. And they were able to successfully predict which faces were going to be the criminal faces. So, why not implement that system? I think that that's in the cards. You see what I'm saying?
It is in the cards, and the natural output of any such ability is to let me figure out if I can use it in a different way. In other words, you're defining what crime means in a certain way to say, like, well, maybe I can, direct the facial recognition software to figure out, with statistical reasonableness, people who are going to be opponents to the state, and I'm going to fuck with them.
Oh yeah, that too. I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, that's a useful tool. Yeah, welcome 1984.
Well, which is effectively to say, here's the fundamental question that I'm asking: are you able to facially recognize soy boys before they become? Yes, of course you can. I'm sure it's very easy. I'm sure they can train the software to recognize open mouth, excited, rolling eyes in the back of skull. Soy boy identified, execute at moment's notice.
Well, look, I mean, those guys, man, when they have that open mouth grin, it just, what it reminds me of? It reminds me of like, I've actually never seen this, but I imagine this, like gay porn, this is the receiving end of gay porn. It just seems, the ecstatic mouth wide open, emptily, happy kind of thing. It's just, they're waiting for the ejaculate. That's the thing that pops into my head whenever I see these expressions. Where did this come from? Of them, like with that open mouth. Obviously, this is a podcast, so I can't mimic it. But this open mouth, weird grin. Where did it come from? I mean, when did we all decide that this was going to be how you would look in a picture? Because when I was growing up, it was just smile, say cheese. That was it. None of this soy boy shit.
I'm still laughing over the idea that you had to say, I've never seen gay porn, but let me tell you, the specific looking thing is exactly how I imagine. So sorry, I'm still
You're still processing that?
I'm still processing it. It's funny that you said when you were a kid, like say cheese and all the picture. I'm still thinking of like my grandparents' generation, was just like, look like you're gonna fucking punch the cameraman out the face. That's how you take a picture. Yeah,
exactly. Just like really stout, serious. Like this is serious business. This whole photography shit. You're stealing part of my soul, so make it good. That kind of thing. But exactly. Seriously, I mean, where did these soy boys come from? Because look, like I said, I haven't been in the United States. I haven't lived in the United States since 2001, I want to say. Yeah, 2001. And I haven't visited since 2012, I believe. Uh, I do believe 2012. And I just want to understand, where did these people come from? Because it's sort of like a foreign species, like a foreign people invaded all of a sudden. Because there weren't these soy boys before. They just didn't exist. And they're so goddamn, low T gay, It must be the food. It must be something that they're taking that is making them like that. Because it doesn't, where did they come from? Okay, is the question I want to know. Because when I was growing up, they didn't exist. And the terrifying thing is to think is that if I'd stayed in the United States, would I be a soy boy now? Would I be a proto-homosexual kind of guy like these guys are? Because that's what they are, as far as I'm concerned.
So I actually don't know exactly where they came from. Certainly, I've heard a lot of theories about food. I can describe this, which is to say, I started noticing it high school, let's say high school through college, and specifically what it came across to me was, yes, passive aggressive, but specifically it's as if these guys became valley girls, which is, kind of ends all sentences, as if it's a question, yeah. kind
Yeah.
of thing. That fundamental lack of assurance
Well, yeah, it's a
about themselves.
passive aggressive because I remember when that like fashion of speaking like that started. It was it was girls, and it was sort of like a passive aggressive kind of like not uh, a way for women to be aggressive without showing it, and sort of like by way of the questioning, by the intonation, sort of like show subservience at the same time asking something that was unpleasant or uncomfortable or challenging to somebody or some person of authority. You know what I mean? That was the initial impetus of it, and then it just like propagated through the whole society. It's just creepy as fuck because every goddamn statement is a question. Hi, my name is John Smith. I think, I don't know, maybe, what the fuck? It just seems creepy. And I think that the way you use language, I mean, Orwell was right. Language can define a people. And I think it's not just the words that you're allowed to use, but the way that you're allowed to use. If it's all very passive and very subservient, you start to create a passive and subservient people. Does this make any sense to you?
Yes, it does. I mean, well, that's actually stolen from, to a certain extent, Nietzsche, in his attitudes about what Christian thinking had done to people. But that's neither here nor there. But the other element that I think maybe playing into this is it's as if, especially because I think it's tied to my generation, as per so many stupid things, and my generation heavily dug deep, particularly around the years I started noticing this shit happening, into the whole notion of irony. Literally every single utterance out of a hipster's goddamn mouth was ironic, and you could never tell how serious one was at any given point in time. My suspicion is when you're continuously ironic, you're continuously playing like, I'm not serious about this, but I'm serious enough. You have a fundamental lack of assurance or knowledge of what do you saying anything that actually can be interpreted as taking a position or meaning anything. And when you're that non-committal, that insecure, it's almost as if you're spineless. And I mean that in a physical way as well as a metaphor. When you're that spineless, even your whole attitude of speech is just kind of wishy-washy. It's
Yeah.
like,
Well, irony is the ultimate cop out because everything is ironic. So you can stand on both sides of the line and say, "Oh, I'm being serious. Oh, I'm being ironic." It depends on your audience. You can say anything. You can say anything, but also what it ultimately means is that you are participating in a conversation without actually contributing anything. You're just giving the illusion of contributing to a conversation, to a discussion. Because what would be the healthy attitude? To shut your fucking mouth. If you don't have anything constructive to say, shut the fuck up, right? Just sit there and listen to other people who do have something constructive to say. But if you're doing these ironic jabs and these ironic statements, it's basically means that you're interfering, but you're not actually taking up a position because your quote unquote ironic statement can be interpreted as being on either side of the line. So which is it? Neither. That's what it means. It means the only thing going on there is your participation. You are wasting everybody's fucking time. That's what it means to be quote unquote ironic. I don't have any patience for these ironic soy boys. I think that they were faggots. back in the day, back in the 90s, when the whole issue of this irony started up, it was so intertwined with the whole Seinfeld thing, a comedy about nothing, that kind of thing. There were all these people who were like hipsters and being all ironic and shit like that. Most of them famously couldn't define what irony was. There's that great scene in Reality Bites, which is a mediocre picture, but at the time had a big impact. And that character is asked, please define irony. It was the Winona Ryder character. Some adult, asked her, please define irony. And Winona Ryder couldn't. She could not define what irony was. And that was the thing. It was the easy way for people who don't know shit from Shinola to participate, to seem as if they're contributing.
My favorite take on that, also from the 90s, was in The Simpsons when Homer goes on a Lollapalooza circuit as a sideshow freak. And one of the sort of Generation Xers is like, oh, a lard ass, he's entertaining. And then a guy turns to him and says, are you being ironic, dude? And this guy just looks to the ground and says, I don't even know anymore.
Yeah, exactly. They don't know anymore. And their beliefs and all the rest of it are just. But the funny thing is that we're moving away from irony into true believerism. True believerdom. Excuse me. We're having the kids who used to be ironic hipsters. Now they are true believers, and what they believe in is socialism. Yay! And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is their avatar. I mean, didn't you hear Tom Perez, the chairman of the DNC? He said that Ocasio-Cortez is the future of the Democratic Party. Yay!
It was also unclear. I didn't read the article, so maybe he was clear, but it was unclear to me when he said that whether he meant the fact that she was a socialist, the fact that she was a Latina, or both.
All of the above. All of the above. It's whatever wins, baby. Whatever wins. Okay, look, the DNC is fucked, right? They're broke. I mean, they don't have any goddamn money. They're not getting any fucking donations. The Clintons had them on life support. Well, the DNC was basically the Clintons' bitch. They're a gimp that they kept in the closet, really, to be abused periodically, right? And now that the Clintons are no more, and they're, I hope that they're finally gone from the political landscape. It seems so, right? Well, the DNC, they're like, they're a gimp without a master, And so I think that the new master might be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Well, I'd like to remind everyone, like a case of herpes, the Clintons never entirely go away.
Yeah.
You can treat them, but they stay and linger, and you have to tell your significant others if you ever encountered one in your past life.
Mm-hmm.
But that being said, yes, and the other thing people tend to forget about them, those were hell of a fundraising family. That was like the one thing they could do.
They knew how to raise money. Wow.
Exactly. And they threw it around too. That was the other thing. That's kind of done. And so the DNC has trouble with that. But that's, I guess, when times are tight and money's tight, socialism will be the key.
Right. Yeah, that works so well for, like, say, Venezuela.
Mm-hmm.
Where a cup of coffee costs a month's salary. Did you hear that meme? That's just unbelievable. I mean, actually, I believe it.
I was still processing the whole idea. It's like, can cockroaches be used as a food source? Venezuela to find out.
I didn't hear that one. That's pretty damn funny. Oh, but please tell me it was a joke or it was for real.
I some version of it was real. I don't know if it was cockroaches or some other disgusting creature or food item, but it was, pretty much that's the premise. Yes. So whatever. I mean, on that front, I don't know ultimately, if irony is done in the face of true believerism. There's certainly things that people in certain circles feel that they must profess to,
such as
hating Trump, wearing the pussy hat.
No, nobody wears the pussy hat. Nobody, no, it was just the one march, and everybody got embarrassed. What?
Everybody spiritually wears that hat, though. I mean, that go away. But what fundamentally does remain is the uncertainty about any kind of culture. By that, I mean when things are like, in other words, like low risk things that don't matter. Like avoid the politics for a second. Just say like, should I like this type of fashion or that type of fashion? If I listen to this music or that music, what have you? That I think will still be ironic because it requires you to make a decision as to what you like, and the risk of someone making fun of you still remains too strong, so everybody will take the "oh, I'm ironically listening to this" to get them out of jail free card. And I think that will maintain itself. I've not seen that leave. I've never seen people overly confident in aesthetic choices. Maybe that's also why critics suck too.
Yeah, critics today. Yeah,
Outside of the political decisions they make about films, actual aesthetic judgments, they're afraid to
yeah,
make those.
yeah. That's something that bothers me. I remember like in the '90s, I was never into irony. Never. I just not my thing. I'm way too direct. And in the '90s, I liked the Bee Gees. I still do. I mean, but I would tell people that I thought the Bee Gees were great, and they'd look at me like I was high, or they would smile as if I was being ironic, and I meant that, genuinely. The Bee Gees are great, but the thing is,
Can I
what?
say something as well? I also think the Bee Gees are good. I really
Yeah,
and I'll objectively say this. I'll fight anyone on it. I think the Saturday Night Fever album is a legitimately great album.
yeah, it is, no question. I mean, it's not that it has, great catchy hooks and track after track is just fun, and it's all danceable. Yeah, but it's musically, it's really interesting. Like You Should Be Dancing, for example, just to take one off the top of my head. It is really interesting on a musical level. You start like listening to it. I mean, really paying attention to it, and it is fun. It is fun. It is interesting. I'm talking on a musical level. There is a lot of sophistication to it, to its arrangements, to how it's put together, everything. And you're like, man, these guys knew what the fuck they were doing. These guys are real musicians, not like the crap that's being pumped out now on Top 40. I mean, Top 40 radio today, these guys don't know shit about any kind of music theory or anything like that. It's whatever's in their Logic Pro or Pro Tools. They don't know anything about music. Whereas the Bee Gees, the brothers Gibb, right? They knew music. It was clear. They knew theory. They knew how to play their instruments. They were all musicians, right? And good musicians. Even what's his name, the kid brother Andy Gibb, right? Even he was a pretty decent musician as a musician, right? I never cared that much about Andy Gibb's music, but the Bee Gees, they were right on the money. And You Should Be Dancing, Staying Alive. There were a bunch of songs that were really, really good.
See, here's the thing: they were good, and you could argue very convincingly that they were good. But it was one of those things that they were always associated with cringe because people associated with them with John Travolta in that fucking white suit and doing the little dance maneuver, and everybody kind of had a run of hating that
Yeah,
for a while. So as a result, and this was something I think I dealt with, and I think everybody kind of deals with in their first 20 some odd years, you would keep to your chest things that you liked objectively, like alone by yourself, you fucking liked this stuff,
sure.
but you would never admit it
Yeah,
because of the fear of someone saying, "Oh, how did you're an idiot for liking that," or they'd make fun of you. And it was kind of also related to this irony shit. Like it's an easy joke to make at someone's expense if like, oh, you're not in with like the hip crowd of whatever.
yeah.
So you would keep that to your chest. As a result, when you would see someone liking something that wasn't in the it crowd, it's an easy joke to score against someone, and then you get little cultural cachet points for it.
Yeah.
That shit, stopped mattering for me after a very quick while.
Yeah.
But I think fundamentally, especially that irony culture, that played it up to the hilt. That's why I never would said for a long time that I liked the Bee Gees, and never said for a long time that there were certain lowbrow like stupid action movies that I enjoyed,
Sure.
what have you. Things like that would continually happen. And I feel like that, I don't know how I can defend this as universally true, but I still feel like there are certain elements. Well, I don't hear. Actually, the obvious opposite could be true. I still feel there are certain elements in the culture you're not allowed to publicly say you like, but at
Oh,
the
yeah.
same time, the culture now seems like, and I don't know if it's ironic or sincere. They're really celebrating all these like niche love, the niche love of like really old asinine like little kid stuff, and the adults are saying like, oh, now
What do you mean?
it's like if you were look back at like watching, oh god, some sort of like Saturday morning cartoon. It's like we need to reinvent the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles again, kind of thing, and make a big
I don't
thing
know.
out of it.
What I despise about the whole, the critics and all that, is that they would celebrate and almost force me to listen to shit that I thought was crap. Like, for instance, I remember around 2000, 99, then, more or less, which was the last time I was really heavily into music, to tell you the truth. they forced me to listen to Bell and Sebastian. And it was a goddamn boring ass band. It was just uninteresting. Just fucking boring. Why am I listening to this shit? And why is some doofus telling me that this is good? Because it's garbage. It's boring. That's what bothered me about it. And this is a man who thinks that Brian Eno's discrete music is one of the coolest pieces of music ever written, right? And discrete music, if you don't know about it, is basically 30 minutes of just droning. Okay, that's basically it. But it's very cool droning. Anyway, I thought that Bell and Sebastian was stupid, and yet everybody thought that it was, all that and more. And I'm like, how is this supposed to be good? And I'd say, Rush is my favorite band, and they'd look at me like I was high. And then I'd say that Bee Gees are, musically interesting, and they'd laugh in my face. So it was like the whole critical culture was just full of shit as far as I'm concerned. I mean, look, it was always full of shit. What?
Yeah. From my experience, and maybe this is true or not, like I was into music, but I never followed music as robustly as I would do literature and film. In other words, I wouldn't go into like the likes of Rolling Stone or the more arch magazines on it and like really chew on the theory and the cultural, like who's in and who's out of it. But it seems to me, just looking from the outside in, that musical elitism and musical critical establishment and consensus seems more intricate and asinine than any other type of criticism. Like I feel like it's very easy to start talking about music and have some, critically minded person immediately look down on you and shit on you if you start talking about what you like.
Well, here's another thing though, is that music critics always had a disproportionate amount of power because you see, there are a lot of people producing music, a lot of people. And so there's so much music being produced that in order to break out, you need help. And who can give you a big helping hand? Who can put you in front of a big audience? A music critic.
Right.
So you're some random band called Bell and Sebastian. And your music is just as shitty as any other amateur band. Because really, Bell and Sebastian is amateur music. It's just bullshit. Okay, so how do you get famous? How do you start selling records? Well, you get some critic to push your shit, right? And so that's why it became so important for critics to elevate a particular band. And that's why a lot of musicians started writing music for critics as opposed to writing it for the audience. That's why, for instance, Rush is loved so vehemently and why it's hated by the critics. Because, they got there without the critics. They didn't need the critics. They found a niche that connected with a very, very large group of fans. And those fans just went to town on Rush and just loved Rush forever. And of course, see, Kiss, Gene Simmons, he once said it best that bands and groups and singers who have female fans, they're flash in the pan. But bands that have guy fans are going to be fans for the rest of their life. And that's absolutely true. I mean, you talk to a guy who was listening to Kiss when he was 11, 12, 13. He's going to be a 50-year-old fart, and he's still going to be listening to Kiss, right? Look at me.
That's right.
I listened to Rush when I was 13 fucking years old, right? Here I am 37 fucking years later, and I'm still a fucking fan, okay? If they put in a show, I'd fucking go there. I'd fucking pay $100 and however much it cost me to fly out to wherever city the show is going to be, and I'd see them, because I'd be figuring maybe this is the last time I'll see them, again. Actually, they definitely retired, but anyway. What?
It's funny you said that. It's like, well, there were a couple of partners at my firm who were really big into Tom Petty and literally went to the last show he did before he died.
Oh, yeah. Poor bastard.
Yeah.
Tom Petty was all right. I liked his music. He had some good tunes. I remember the first tune I heard of his was You Don't Have to Live Like a Refugee, which is pretty cool and oddly prescient, if you think about it. But he was all right. He was kind of crazy. And I thought the Traveling Wilburys was a pretty good idea. It was the one supergroup that was fun. Because so many supergroups were just about making money. But Traveling Wilburys seemed like these really good musicians were just having fun. Because they're all rich enough not to really need it. So they were just having a good time. Yeah.
But it is true that now that you had mentioned it about, Gene Simmons and the male fans, once they're a fan for life. You can kind of tell, just like you can tell when a man retired by seeing the style of his clothing. because like literally like the last when he retires, generally speaking, the last time he buys a suit
Yeah,
or its style of suit.
yeah,
So I think you could also tell when a man hit like his mid 30s by whatever he was listening to in his mid 30s. That's the most up to date band he's gonna have
yeah,
in his listening set.
yeah, yeah. I think that my most up to date band is Kings of Leon. Okay, they're all right. I like them. I like the way they record and the sound that they produce. And oh, what was the name of this band that did this album El Camino, which is pretty damn good. It's like a like rock kind of thing. But no, the top 40 shit now, man, it's fucking boring. It all sounds the same. It all
There
sounds the
was
same.
well, it was like it must have been 5 years ago or something like that. I saw an article. I forget where, I forget who did it. Forgive me, but it was some, I forget what publication, but they compiled like I guess like a handful or quite a large number of pop songs that were popular
Uh-huh.
whenever this article was written. They took the sound waves and like they kind of like superimposed them over each other and
They're all the
kind of
same.
held together. It basically held together. It wasn't too cacophonous. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably true. It's probably all formulaic written,
No,
written throughout.
I love the best one. There was this guy who did this mix of country songs, and he got like, I don't know, like a dozen different country songs, and they're supposed to be all different, right? And they were all hits, right? And he like took snippets of each and put them in just one giant long eternal song, right? And it fit because they all sounded the same. All these dozen songs. The only difference was the singer's voice, and only mildly so, because the male voices and the female voices tended to be the same. Yeah, like music is so genre specific now, and it's so dull. There's nothing exciting. Okay, that was the thing about Rush. I mean, look, even back when I was growing up, pop music was very predictable, and there was that vibe about Rush that you never knew what the fuck they were going to do next, and that was why it was so exciting, because it was always like a leap into the dark. Music today is even more boring. There's this really interesting channel that I watch, YouTube channel called Thoughty2, like Thoughty2, the number two, and it's this British guy, and he does these videos and they're terrific, and he talks about why modern music, modern pop music, all sounds the same. And he basically points out that, you see, it's just a handful of composers and producers who are putting out
Right.
the majority of the music. They're all from Sweden, and that's the thing. It's basically ABBA. That's what we're listening to. We are listening to ABBA. You see, I once heard that the soundtrack of hell is ABBA 24/7. Well, then that would mean that we are, if not in hell, in purgatory. That's the only explanation. Because at least
No,
we get to
you're
turn off the music, so it must be purgatory.
It's funny you'd mentioned that. I had I think I did see that article about, or whatever that came from, that yeah, all the Swedes are producing it, and it's but it was funny. I noticed that personally. Like I remember a few years ago when what's her face, uh the one who always dresses in the meat dresses or the odd animal thing, Lady Gaga.
Oh yeah.
She did Alejandro, or song
Uh-huh.
Alejandro. Like, okay, so this is just Fernando from Baba. Okay, I get it. You tweaked it a little bit. I heard this song. I'm good with it. I can go back to bed.
No,
And she's supposedly the radical, creative pop singer. There's no such thing. No
well, I
such.
like Lady Gaga, but yeah, she's just recycling shit. I like her as a performance artist, but I think that there's nobody interesting out there. Nobody interesting out there in terms of music that you want to listen to, that you look forward to their albums. At least I haven't heard any. Or maybe it's just that I'm just behind the times. Just you get to a certain age, you don't give a shit anymore. Because, like, for instance, I used to be able to listen to music and work. Now I can't. I no longer have the attention span to both, absorb music and do whatever I'm doing. Except actually, that's not exactly true. I can listen to classical music, but anything with lyrics, I have to tune it out. I have to turn it off because I cannot focus on my work. But I listen to Mozart piano sonatas.
Yeah.
That's sort of like my go-to music when I just want to have wallpaper, musical wallpaper while I do stuff. Yeah, that's nice. Especially.
I do something similar. It's either that or Baroque, or I do Gregorian chant, some variation on that.
Well, Gregorian chant I can't do. But what I do, because I find it too absorbing. I frankly get moved by the music. I really enjoy Gregorian chants, and that's why sometimes when I put it on, I sort of like get distracted by it. So, for instance, Gregorian chants for me are great for like when I'm doing something, monotonous, like cooking or something like that. But then again, Gregorian chants when you're cooking, but there are more people, then it's just weird because it's a weird music. You gotta admit it, right?
Yeah, you're hosting a party and everybody says, "Oh, it's fine things today happened with the
Yeah.
thing or other," and then all of a sudden, Deus Irae, Deus Irae. I was like, "Oh shit,"
Yeah,
what the fuck
exactly.
just happened?
Yeah,
I would,
exactly.
if someone in my fucking home party decided to say something stupid, I would put on Deus Irae because that's letting me have judgment.
Yeah, yeah, but no, but like for instance, I
But
like I
needless
like
to
the
say,
Brandenburg concertos.
yeah.
That's great. That's happy. It's and you can put it like almost subliminal. I'm very much into subliminal music now. The Brian
Oh yeah.
Eno experiments of the early '70s, that kind of shit. I love that
Oh yeah.
crap. You know.
Well, I like that. I like repetitive, non-lyrical songs. I like that you'll see a lot of videos where people say like, meditative music at like 400 some odd hertz, 500 some odd hertz,
Yeah,
600 some odd hertz.
yeah,
Those are actually frankly compelling. I don't know why. But whatever, they have their reasons. I put that on. Flute music, old, like Native American flute music, Japanese flute music. It frankly doesn't matter where, it actually just generally works very well as a meditative process or for falling asleep or what have you. So that's actually what that kind of odd music. And then the only other like contemporary-ish music I like listening to is I think neo synth music. It's basically guys reproducing that kind of synthy sounds of the mid early 80s. And that stuff I'll listen to, but that's a similar vein. It's meditative. I actually don't go out of my way to track down new pop music,
no,
but
no,
frankly, I never did. But so it's not, perhaps that's not a fair assessment of where am now versus where I was. But I will say comparatively, and probably along similar lines to you, I actually don't go out of my way to watch new movies either. Not necessarily because I think, well, I probably do think there's a grand theory of why they're failing, but it's just that they're not very interesting to me anymore.
yeah.
Tracking down new things. Frankly, new books too. Not very interested. I'm very quickly going backwards on all aesthetic tastes.
Well, it seems to me that in the current paradigm, what would be considered mainstream literature, mainstream music, mainstream films are just not very interesting. It's just that bottom line. They seem to be trying to ring a bell that is just very tinny sounding, because every piece of art is trying to ring a bell in the audience, right? That's the whole nature of it. Make it feel excitement, make it feel this or that or whatever. That's the whole idea of art. It's supposed to make you feel an emotion or move you to a thought in the case of perhaps more sophisticated art, right? Mainstream art, it's supposed to move the audience. But the thing is, see, it keeps doing the same fucking thing, like the movies. They're all about these heroic superheroes. And you're supposed to feel heroism or sadness when one of them maybe might die, but then, of course, he gets revived later. There's never any sense of real loss, and the victories are all kind of like hollow because they're guaranteed, and there was never really the fear that they would fail, and so it's just not really very interesting. I can't really get behind that kind
But
of.
I would also even say, and this is where, in theory, the hipster was supposed to thrive. Going back to that, was their whole big thing was, oh, this mainstream stuff, I don't do that. I go down this odd path of odds and ends and through, secret passageways into the storehouses of the musicology of the world. And after many, sojourns into odd realms and finding maps that can only be seen in moonlight, I'll find these odd bits of music. And even then, after putting all that fucking effort, it's like, okay, all of this basically sounds the same too.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
easily bland.
Yeah.
So what was the fucking point of all of this extra effort you put in?
Yeah, exactly. The last time, or no, not the last time, but I'm thinking offhand, when somebody really brought back some really obscure music that I'm really glad that they did was when, for the Thin Red Line, they Hans Zimmer did that incredible score, a beautiful, beautiful piece of music, right? But they also did the CD of Melanesian chants, and it was so moving. It's basically pidgin English, and it's these these little villagers, not little. I'm saying little because many of them are children. Okay, and that's what I was thinking because I remember the visual of them, and they were small children, and they're singing these chants in pidgin English, and they are just so moving. They are so moving and so full of passion, because there's true belief in their chanting. They truly believe in the songs that they're singing, because they're all religious songs, of course. They're Christian religious songs. And these people believe the music, and so as they sing it, there's a power to it, a grandeur to it, even as it is incredibly unsophisticated and incredibly basic, okay? But moving, you know? And that was the last time that I can think of offhand that somebody went to some far-off reaches of, you know, the depths of the chest of musicology and brought back something really cool. Most of the time when critics come back and say, oh, you got to listen to this band or that band, okay, yeah, fine, sure, I'll listen to it. It's just, you know, just banal bullshit, you know? And often as not, it turns out that the critic is friends with the musicians that he's recommending, okay?
Of course.
And so it was just like, oh man, this shit, you know, at least, what's his name? What was the director of Thin Red Line? His name is escaping me right now. Terrence Malick. Terrence Malick. Malick was the one who found this music when he went scouting in locations, right? And he thought it was great, and he brought it back, and, you know, they did like field recordings. And you can tell it's a field recording because you can hear like birds and the palm fronds literally, you know, waving in the breeze. You can hear it in the recordings, and they're terrific. And that's something interesting. That's something that you're like, yes, thank you. But
and you get that in part because you have a very unique, very odd mind of Terrence Malick who's going to find that. You know, and I just don't think that critics are expected to have any mindset like that anymore.
Well, more to the point, he has regardless of what you think of Terrence Malick's pictures, he has an aesthetic point of view. He has made up his mind as to what's good and what's shit. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's not like how could I put this? Well, like we were saying today, critics today are shit. Critics today are shit, and they think that what's good is just garbage. And I shake my head, and I feel sorry for young people coming up because they don't know what good music is. They think that whatever Rolling Stone says is good is rock. But I've been realizing I've never been like that big of a fan of rock and roll that I have to go and find out every fucking obscure band or shit like that. But I've been discovering that there are a lot of bands that Rolling Stone just blows over and ignores that are much more interesting than a lot of the bands that they highlighted over the decades. You know. And it's just sad, but you know they just fall into obscurity, and you know that's that. It's
this is an odd question, but related. Doesn't have to be in music. Could be any of like music, literature, film. Doesn't matter. Who was the last critic you read that you actually read for enjoyment, and you thought this guy has sense about him, guy or woman? Frankly,
Roger Ebert.
Really, Roger Ebert.
Yeah.
And what about Roger? I mean, he's not knocking the guy. I was out of curiosity, why Roger?
Because he was practical about his critiques, and he always judged each picture based on the merits of the picture. He wasn't how could I put it? He wasn't trying to impose his view of what the picture ought to be. He was looking at the picture and judging it on its own basis.
Yeah.
And that's important. And I think that very few critics do it. I think that so many critics, basically, they're like, okay, I have an aesthetic ideal of what this movie ought to be, and if it doesn't make that ideal, then it's shit. And for example, I remember very clearly when Die Hard came out, there was a Robert De Niro picture with Charles Grodin that came out at the same time. I forget the name of it. It was like an action picture. And a lot of critics said, oh, that's such a much better action picture than Die Hard. And it wasn't. It was a very quotidian 80s kind of movie. And it wasn't very interesting. It wasn't well directed. There's nothing about it that was interesting or compelling. And Die Hard was just incredibly compelling. And I thought, they're idiots.
Exactly. Well, you had me laughing as soon as you said action picture with Charles Grodin. If that doesn't set off an alarm bell, I don't know what does. I liked Roger Ebert as well. I think there were a few times he actually did impose, his point of view on what the picture should have been, but it was rare. honestly, to me, there is a guy contemporary that I actually pay attention to. I actually think is very good, but as soon as I tell people his name, they're going to laugh at me and say, "You love the troll," and it's Armand White. Everybody thinks Armand Wright is just a
Who's
troll
Armin
out there to
Wright?
just.
I don't know.
Armand Wright is the black film critic for the National Review. Armand White is very famous for being very contrarian. Like, for example, he hates the Marvel movies, but actually goes out of his way to defend the DC movies as having a better moral understanding of the universe or of human society, which I actually think is kind of interesting, his take on that.
That's
But
interesting.
every
But does he concede that they're shittier movies? I mean, they're both shitty, but DC movies are shittier as movies.
No, he doesn't. He actually maintains that they are, because of their moral positions, that just fundamentally better movies as a result.
Oh,
I don't
that's
really
interesting.
care much for that, but yeah, his argument's compelling, and he was also the one. I think I posted it recently. He wrote an article on how freaks and geeks, particularly the guy who
Judd Apatow?
Judd Apatow, and then I think Paul Feig, the guy who gave us the Ghostbusters all
Oh,
gal
God.
remake. They got their bones on that, and his whole point was, look, all of this sort of, dismissive, destructive, corrosive humor that you have now, which is all about not just deconstructing, but basically tearing to shreds any kind of traditional, not American, just decency, but even just like anything that you like that is positive, these guys will rip out and declare as ironic shit, comes from that show. And it's not just because of Judd Apatow and Paul Feig, but also like Seth Rogen and all of the other kind of comedians and actors who
Basically,
were
you're
involved
saying
with
that
show.
it's nihilism.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I could get behind that analysis. Yeah, sure.
And so yeah, so I always fundamentally like Armand White on that, and it's funny because everybody's just, like I said, suddenly think he's just a troll or being provocative for provocative sake, and I think you're completely misreading him or not giving him enough credit if you treat it that way. And he's the one critic I actually enjoy reading as a result of that. I used to really like, from time to time, like A.O. Scott. I used to like.
Oh, I tried reading his book. It was awful.
I never read his. I don't read their.
Man, it
their
was so
books are
bad that I
terrible.
returned it. Okay.
Mhm.
I rarely do that. Even with shitty books, I sort of like, okay, it's a shitty book, and I just put it in my library. But it was so bad that I decided, no, I'm not going to own this shit because it was just embarrassing. It was pretentious. It was like, oh God, what was the name of the fucking book? Let me look it up real quick while you talk while I look this up.
Well, what's funny is that he, and along with a lot of other critics, and this is just frankly film critics, but I'm sure it's above and beyond them. A.L. Scott, Dana Stevens at Slate, Manola Dargis at the New York Times. You go on down the list. They used to be readable until, and I'm sorry to bring this back to the politics, until 2016 election. At that point, they all threw
Went
into
insane.
every single goddamn review the political, correct attitudes that they needed to have, without question.
Yeah.
I mean, they all shifted, and I'm like, I remember when you guys didn't talk about these things. You actually just talked about the aesthetics of the movie.
Yeah.
Now it's all like empowering women and shit.
Yeah.
And not just women, or like whatever minority position, and like, oh, this is a movie that really talks about how, there's no such thing as borders, and we're all one people, all that kind of shit.
Well, the thing is, see, all of this the shit. Dana Stevens, I haven't followed Dana Stevens in a while. She's also gotten on the SJW bandwagon. Oh man.
It's to the point where I honest to God thought that like it was like a masthead decision across all these papers, and all these papers conspired with each other and said, okay, here's how we're going to
resist
going
Trump.
forward.
Yeah.
You were going to resist, Trump. That'll be our mantra, and you guys all have to go forward with it. It was weird. It was to the point where it was so consistent. I thought to myself, either you've all drunk the Kool-Aid and you don't give a shit, which I actually think is probably the truth of it, or you're really just very good at following orders these days.
Yeah,
and you frankly don't care.
Yeah, the weird thing is that to circle it back to the beginning of this conversation with how the Democratic Party is going off a cliff following Ocasio-Cortez. I mean, that's what they're saying, right? And I don't doubt them. They are going to get blown the fuck out of the water come November in the midterms if they really do this shit, and if they really double down for 2020 and they nominate. I am betting you that they are going to nominate Kamala Harris, or however you pronounce her name, Kamala Harris, the black female. What is
from senator from California? I think it's Kamala Harris. I don't know.
Kamala Harris from the senator from California. they are going to nominate her in 2020. She's got a safe seat, a safe Senate seat, so she would be a good person to nominate. And Kristen Gillibrand, I think she's up for re-election in 2020. Okay, so I think that would not. Wait, she is since 2009. So yeah, I think that she's up for re-election in 2020 for her Senate seat. So she can't run for both Senate and the presidency. So I think that she's going to be smart and focus on her Senate seat, and because she won in 2008, right? So that means that's 12 years for 2020. So she's up for re-election. So no fucking way is she running in 2020. And it'll be Kamala Harris, who's got a safe seat because she was inaugurated in 2017. So yeah, that's my thinking. They're doubling down. Okay, I lost the plot there.
Well, here's the thing: you were trying to connect it to the critics. You know how critics just went lock, stock, and barrel on this position, pushed it forward. This prompted a question in my head, and I've had it for a while, and not just on left wing. I worry about it on our side. To what extent are we going to critics or film or music or books, what have you, simply to reaffirm our own moral suppositions? In other words,
that's always been the case. That art always sort of like eases our minds about our moral outlook. Sure.
Well, here's the odd thing, though. I still try to take pride in the fact that I enjoy and respect artwork that I know is antithetical to what I actually believe in or actually think is the appropriate moral stance.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you the best example. One of the better examples of that. I actually think there's a movie from the 60s called Battle of Algiers, which is frankly about the Algerian resistance to the French and basically the lead up to their revolution for their independence. Right. I think it's a very compelling film. It's a socialist film as ever there was one.
Yeah, well, I can point to a book that I pretty much the same thing as The Cider House Rules by John Irving. It's technically and on many levels one of the great novels. It's an amazing piece of writing, no question, and yet it's pro-abortion, which I find despicable. Because I'm virulently pro-life, anti-abortion, and I've grown into this position. When I was younger, I didn't really care, but as I've gotten older, I've become more and more pro-life. And the book is, pro-abortion, and it has this incredibly powerful scene where an abortion happens, and it's almost like a deliverance. Okay, I mean, you feel uplifted. Okay, which is completely antithetical to everything that I believe in and think. And yet I have to admire the skill and ability of John Irving to be able to pull off such a feat, because it really is an extraordinary achievement.
Right.
It's in a very real sense, I think it's almost satanic that it's glorifying fucking abortion, but you got to give the devil his due. You know what I'm saying? Literally in this case.
Well, there's a lot of art that I go to that exhibits that, which is a fundamentally aesthetically significant way of depicting something I fundamentally disagree with, that I'm forced to confront and say whether or not I have to adjust myself to it, or do I have to figure out what's going on here. I am interested and willing to confront that, but part of the reason I brought this up with the critics' shift to a very hard line on, frankly, public policy, which is still a strange idea to me.
Yeah.
The fact that they do that, and the fact that we all go to our particular newspapers to look for, or I say newspapers in scare quotes, to look for the particular, it's like, what is the film or the book or the music that's going to reaffirm what I believe in, which musician has my politics and everything. I worry that that's an intentional act to not challenge yourself in any kind of way. And it still comes full circle to that whole hipster notion of like, I'm not going to take any kind of risk that would embarrass me in front of my friends, in front of my peers. I don't want to be out, in the out group as a result of, missing an aesthetic judgment. And that just seems very, I wouldn't want to say dangerous, because I'm not feeling like it's the end of the world as a result of that, but it's certainly a very missed opportunity.
Well, my thinking is along the following lines. You see, the critics going on and on about this nonsense of politics, and as if it's the end of the world, and they really are living in Nazi Germany or some shit like that. I think that later everybody's going to look back on this period as if it were exceedingly foolish, or they're going to look back on it if we go into a civil war as, why didn't people just back the fuck off and try to just come to some sort of compromise and just, mellow out and not, freak the fuck out over what was essentially trivial. Because, look, come on, let's face facts. The Donald Trump presidency is trivial. Okay, nothing much is going on. Okay, there are no fucking death camps. It's not. Kristallnacht is not happening every other day. No, come on, wake up, and be realistic. Okay, and it's the hysteria of the left, as far as I'm concerned. They have become hysterical. They have become hysterical women who we are too polite to bitch slap. Okay, quite frankly. Because we gotta bitch slap them until they wake up out of their goddamn hysteria, because this is it. And hopefully, this blowout in November will wake them up. I don't think so. I think that they're going to double down. And in 2020 is going to be the apogee of their complete psychosis. And when they lose in 2020, because people are realizing more and more that, the average normie is realizing more and more that Trump is perfectly acceptable as a president. He's embarrassing. That's the thing. He personally is embarrassing, okay? But he's not he's not eating minority babies for breakfast every day, okay? He's just some guy, okay? And there are so many controls and so many stopgaps that he really doesn't have that much freedom of movement, freedom of operation. Nothing dangerous is happening, okay? They're talking about this Kavanaugh nominee for Supreme Court Justice. The guy's perfectly acceptable, He might have, we're splitting hairs as to his opinions. He's not saying, all the blackies should be disarmed and all the whiteys should get some tanks and stuff and let's go shoot black people. He's not saying anything like that, okay? But the point is the left is becoming so hysterical that in 2020, when they lose, and they lose big, because they're going to keep on doubling down on this hysteria, when they finally get their wake-up call, I'm wondering if they'll be able to recover or if they will be all swept aside by some other force. You see what I'm saying? By some normie force. Because the way the left and the Democratic Party and the people who are the traditional gatekeepers of the mainstream culture are behaving, it's just embarrassing. And it looks like they're going to double down with each successive loss. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, so my take on that is similar, but a little different. And by that, I mean, I think, let's say they lose in 2020. I even think it could happen as early as 2018. But let's say that they lose in 2020 and they realize, oh, fuck, we failed again. And, is left to people's own devices. They don't like us for reasons we don't understand.
They must be wrong.
They must be wrong. But here's the thing. And again, I tying it all the way back to Amazon, which is part of the reason I brought it up in the discussion. The more they feel that way and the more they have control over the levers of very dangerous tools like Amazon's facial recognition, the ability to shut down all social media access, the ability to shut down all funding on Patreon and the like.
Yeah.
They will use that, or PayPal, exactly. They will use those tools even more draconianly than they're using them now. The goal being is like, okay, if we can't beat you
fair.
The legal way, the fair, because we're so convinced of our moral rectitude, we'll defeat you any way possible. I think this is already kind of starting.
Yeah.
But I think it will get very intense. And so this is why I was paying attention to the likes of Amazon, Facebook, whatnot, and whatever tools they have to discriminate against anybody for political reasons, because that is why and how they would use it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, because the thing where they shut off Milo Yiannopoulos' ability to PayPal for some random shit he said to some journalist, and it was a joke, okay? You could say it was a distasteful joke or whatever, or a badly timed joke, but it was a fucking private joke that he said to some journalists, okay? And they shut out his PayPal. What the fuck is that? What happens if, now you start saying the wrong thing and your bank says, oh, we don't want you as a client anymore because we think, Mr. Benway, you might be a Nazi. What the fuck? That's kind of crazy. And but that's what they're seeming to be. They seem to be fine with this thing, and they don't flip it around. They don't take what they are promulgating and think, what happens if it affects me? They don't go that. They don't have that imaginative leap, and I find that just bizarre. Oh man, it's just gonna get fucking ugly. Okay,
They're focused on short-term winning. That's why.
Yeah.
But that's the I think that's the sum total of everything we've said today. I think it all comes back. I
It all
always
comes
make
back.
a comeback.
Yeah, it always comes back. Yeah. So with that being said, this has been the Coach and Benway podcast, and we just want to thank you all for listening, and we wish you a fond farewell.
And for the Americans in the audience, we're recording this on the 3rd of July, so happy 4th of July. Even though it'll be a little bit delayed. By the time it gets to you, you get the idea.
Yeah. Okay, take it easy.